Hello everyone, Kirby1 here, and welcome back to my Asphodel multiplayer series. Part 2 is going to be Pretender design, and we're going to jump right in with the Pretender that I decided to go with for this game. And then we'll follow that up with another Pretender that I have used in a multiplayer blitz, and then get into more general Pretender design ideas, going over things like scales, bless, different chassis ideas. And then we'll wrap up with a little bit of some general strategies, item forging directions, spell options, research, and things like that. And so maybe we'll try and keep this a shortish video. We'll see. Here we are with Dance of the Hours. I will be genuinely surprised if anyone gets this reference, but it might come up later on in the game when I decide on my profit renaming scheme. Some of the thoughts that I had with this one were probably inspired just by the patch itself rather than necessarily good ideas. I decided I really wanted to try larger just because of the black minotaurs, to be honest, and thinking that we'd have even larger tramplers would be pretty funny to me. But there are actually a couple of upsides and downsides in general to taking larger on Asphodel specifically. Some of the upsides are the things like higher HP on your sacred mages and a bit more map move and things like that. Plus, if you're pairing with things like Undying and Asphodel's regen and things like that, you can get a little bit of extra HP regen on that front. But the other sort of downside to larger is that specifically centaurs and your Sagittarian carcasses are both going to be going from size 5 to size 6, which makes them at 1 per square, which severely limits their attack density. On top of that, as I've been playing more games in Dominion 6, I've come to feel just general vibes that larger as a bless is a lot more expensive in Dominion 6 than it was in 5, because you have to pay for all 7 of these points here when you're picking it. The other combo I went with was just Blood Surge for expansion help. Black Centaurs can really benefit from something like that, and then it never really falls off later on in the game to have Blood Surge. And Undying pairs well not only for expansion in general, but just for your sacreds as well. And I really wanted to try out one of the new Pretender chassis, so I went with the Titan Mandragora so that I would be able to get the Mother Mandragora, so I could get all of these paths for forging and things like summons as well for more of the glamour stuff. And having higher earth on your Pretender is really helpful as well. So that was my thinking here. It worked fine, and I don't regret it, but I think I would probably take a couple of different ideas, which we'll go over in a bit. And here we have good old Asphodel Sucks, which is honestly, Blitz Pretender. The reason I say that is going dormant, you really can't afford to go imprisoned unless you are just imagining that your Pretender is never going to show up because of the length of most blitzes. But I really wanted to try out vampiric weapons, and unfortunately in the blitz that I was in, I didn't get a chance to play with its interaction, its fun interaction with sleep vines, but it does have that interaction, as I've described before a couple of other times, just because of the way that sleep vine works as applying fatigue damage, that is actual straight up damage in an attack. If you have sacreds with sleep vines, which includes your sacreds troops that you get from either reanimation or free spawn in Templed Forests, as well as any of your Twiceborn chassis or the summoned versions thereof, like the Carrion Ladies or the Carrion Lords. All of them and their Sleepvine attacks will apply all weapon blesses to any of their attacks. So vampiric weapons is just thematically fun because the way vampiric weapons has to work is that you have to damage the target, and I use damage in air quotes because fatigue damage counts as damage for bypassing armor, but you have to not kill the target. Sleepvines will very generously not kill your target for you. And then so I think other weapon blesses that could be really cool are things like thunder weapons or slowing weapons. Really anything that puts the hurt on by just mass attacks of Sleepvines. And normally Sleepvines have a really low attack value, but as I went over in my previous video, just because of the new Carrion Furies having ridiculously high attack value stacked on by having Berserk and stuff like that, you can actually dish out a lot of really strong attacks using weapon blesses in general. And so this would be a fun thing to do, but I think that in general I probably would take a weapon bless as a surprise imprisoned rather than awake, because for expansion Black Centaurs really don't need it, and for dormant, unless you feel like you're probably going to be rushed, you could take it, but weapon blesses tend to be pretty expensive, and so I wouldn't necessarily want to spend the points on it rather than getting the kind of skills that you generally want, such as growth or magic or things like that, maybe even luck. As you can see, my skills are pretty garbage, especially both this one and the previous one have misfortune too. And then heroism, of course, exists still. It's been nerfed. I think it's still fine, especially because it pairs well with having recuperation on all of your sacreds. The fact that you get more experience stars translating to better attack values over time, it can sometimes be limited by having very wounded sacreds later on in the game, just from the number of battles they've been in and the beating they've taken. But having recuperation on all of your Black Centaurs, your Black Minotaurs, and all of your mages and sacreds is really going to help with that. And so it's good, but maybe not as good and not a 100% default pick as it used to be. So pretender design. I'm going to start in this box right here, Dominion, and we're going to sort of start with the scales first. And I'll break it down into two general categories. I'm going to say the first three and the second three. So order, productivity, and heat cold, I would probably say those are the dump scales. And the second three, growth, luck, and magic, are probably the buff scales. And the reason I say that is just because of the benefits that you get from it. Obviously, growth is your national theme, so having high growth is a given, although, as I pointed out with the particular site that you get, you don't necessarily have to go growth 4 or that much, just because you will have high growth in your cap at the very least. But I think that's sort of like a long shot. I would try and aim for having as high growth as you can. And I'm just going to briefly touch on the fact that that kind of limits a couple of options that you might have normally considered because they have scale limit. There we go. All right. So for example, the Demi-Lich, like a lot of people are like, Demi-Lich, best Lich. Yes, except for now you can only take growth 3, which you may or may not care about. And so all of these ones here, the Drakina, the Statue of the Underworld, a couple of other options, those are probably going to be out for you in the long run. Aside from that, I have taken Misfortune in the past couple of games, and you know what they say, Misfortune scales, free scales. Maybe, maybe not. I think that Misfortune is extremely punishing, even Misfortune 2 in Dominion 6. And having luck will be able to get you your national heroes if that's something you care about. Plus, getting extra gem income is really nice, and it does pair well with Turmoil. However, the one thing I would say about the left 3 scales is that as far as Turmoil and Order goes, this maybe is the least dumpable scale in my opinion, just because you can dump it and you won't mind too much, especially later on in the game if you're going super high Dominion, because you're going to kill all your population anyways, and then you'll just be a full transitioned free spawn nation. But your troops, your recruitable troops, do benefit from having a lot of recruitment point costs. So you can actually spam out a lot of regular centaurs if you go a little bit of order, or if you just go neutral order turmoil scales at the very least, at which point there isn't really any point to taking luck. I mean, there is a little bit, but you're going to be getting negative events, so and you're also just spending extra design points, which you could be using on something that would be for your bless, which I think is more important. And magic scales, I guess you can take it or leave it. I like it just because in addition to the benefits of the better free spawn that you get better research, obviously. But I have heard people saying that they probably don't need it just because if you don't want the things like the elephants or the minotaurs or the bears or something like that, the sacred recruitment and free spawn rate is not tied to the magic scales. There is potentially an argument even to go drain, although you're not going to be able to get as good drain unless literally you just take the demiurge, in which case you can go drain 2. Everybody else is just drain 1 just because of being Asphodel. And that argument is just because obviously undead are banishable, but mannequins do have a little bit more MR than normal, so you can kind of skirt around that, and you don't really want to be fighting in your own dominion anyways. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest it, but it is there as an option, especially if you're trying to find more design points somewhere and you just don't care as much about research or things like that. And lastly in this box, we're going to touch on Dominion. Now, there are 2 philosophies for Asphodel in this kind of state of the game, which people are considering, and one of them is the usual, just go high Dominion. I would personally aim for probably 8. If you are really greedy, you can go 9 or 10 just to really crank it out, but 8 is the sweet spot just because of the way that getting temple gem mechanics works, because once you have 8 candles and you build 5 temples, or 4 more since you start with 1, then you're going to have 9 candles, and once you build another 5, then you're going to have 10 candles, which means that each additional temple that you're getting is maximizing the number of temple gem income that you get. So 2 is 2 income, 3 is 3 income, and once you've got 8, 8 is plus 8 nature income, and you've already got the first 5, which means that once you get your 9th, you're still getting plus 9 income. Whereas if you were at, like, for example, 5, and you build 5 more temples, then each of those temples is now only producing 6 nature gems past the 6th until you get another 5. So anyways, I hope that makes sense. It makes sense in my head, but yeah, so that's generally how the Dominion candle nature income is going to work. And then the other option is actually to take one of the Dominion 1 pretender options, Probably the best two are either Grey ones or Frostfather, although I believe Archmage is pretty good because of Farcaster and things like that, and then Great Enchantress gives you extra glamour gems, so there's plenty of options you can go with. We'll pick the Grey ones here, but if you go with Dominion 1, then you're only going to get the pop kill relative to your starting Dominion, which means that you'll only have 1% per candle, which is 1, pop loss throughout your entire empire, and you can then selectively use your mage priests who have priest level 2, even the cheaper ones, to actually do a pretty decent job of putting higher Dominion candles in selective provinces for better free spawn rate, and then also holding off enemy Dominion. So that would be the strategy there, and it is quite risky because if somebody really pushes you, you can get Dom killed pretty quickly, but it will allow you to go longer in the game, with better income out of your capital. Now, I'm just going to come right out and say that personally, I would not take this option. I don't really like it as on a couple of levels. First is theme, obviously. Asphodel is a pop kill nation where you are killing everybody to turn them into magical puppets. So that's just my take on that regard. The other is that from a use perspective, you're spending a bunch of your mage priests to waste their time preaching when they could be forging, researching, casting spells, or participating in battles. So I feel like that's a little bit of a waste on that front. And then in addition to that, there's the obvious negative effects of not getting as much nature income from your temples, and also not being able to recruit as many of your national cap-only sacreds. Now, they are being replaced by scales troops because you will have more money and things like that, but I think that your sacreds are still your best bet, just in my personal opinion, for early game rushes and expansions, and not being able to recruit as many of them sort of disincentivizes you from getting a bless, at which point, like, why do you want to have this many design points for a bless that you're not even really going to be using, except for things like thugs or whatever. Anyways, that's just my 2 cents. I wanted to mention both of them as viable options, but I also have opinions on it. So there's that. As far as blesses go, like I was saying, we've got the weapon blesses. Thunder weapons and vampiric weapons are probably super strong. Vampiric weapons being a lot more expensive, though, of course, and I probably would only take those as imprisoned, probably not even dormant, just because of how expensive they are, and you don't need them that early in the game. So in general, what I would probably be doing is taking either dormant or imprisoned. I don't think that there are really any of these incarnate blesses that you really need for black centaurs, just as you wouldn't really need any of them for white centaurs if you were playing a Pangea game. And I don't think any of them are particularly useful specifically for black minotaurs. And black minotaurs are just so much more expensive gold-wise that they can't really be spammed as efficiently early game for expansion against indies or against first player in a first war, especially if you're going to be taking an Awake Pretender and sort of hell blessing like that. So I'm probably aiming for either dormant, but more likely imprisoned, which will allow you to get a lot more of a bless. And for imprisoned blesses, you've got the usual kind of things. You've got attack skill, defense skill, both good, I think, for both black centaurs and even black minotaurs a little bit, although defense would be a little less good. You've got larger, which I have used, but like I said, it's a bit expensive and there are downsides to it. Strength of the earth, strength of the flesh, obviously, just rack up that strength and be supreme heavy hitters. But even those, I would say, you probably don't need now that black minotaurs exist to smack things in the face with giant axe. Blur and things like that are fine, but because you're a glamour nation, you can just apply blur already to your own troops, so maybe not even that. I think probably the blood blesses for imprisoned are the best ones, and to be honest, I would seriously consider almost all of these. So Blood Surge is a given just because of the stat boosts that it gives, and your sacreds are very killy. Enchanted Blood pairs supremely well with Undying, which for your nation is also very synergistic for your undead sacred troops. And I want to give special mention to Strong Blood. And Strong Blood is really cool just because it gives you +5 poison resistance to all of your sacreds, which is actually going to be really great for both your recruitable sacred troops as well as your mages, your dryad hags, and your regular dryads, because that will allow them to stand better in foul vapors, whereas your panic apostates will already be having about 5 poison resistance just from being so high in nature already. So on top of that, you get +80 disease resistance, which is also really good for your dryad hags, because they basically start out as old age and are susceptible to being diseased, especially if you are going to be dumping cold scales. So I think Strong Blood is really good to pair with both of these, which means that you only have to go Blood 4 and then go wide with somebody like a Imprisoned Rainbow or something like that, and you can get basically all of the Blood Blesses. Some of the other imprisoned blesses that you can consider are things like Farcaster and Arcane Finesse. Finesse works really well with a couple of the glamour spells that you can get, and also obviously pairs well with your Sleep Vines on your sacreds. So there's that to consider. Farcaster can be a lot of fun for a lot of your spells, especially the new ones in Death and Nature Crosspath, like the here we go, the Venomous Death spell, which has a shortish range but is 100% precision, applying 25 poison and decay. So really fun to be throwing these out a lot, especially at longer range. All of your Dryad Hags can do this, and all of your Panic Apostates can do this. There's one last super meme bless that I want to mention, and I really want to emphasize that I feel like this is a meme, but it would be really funny to see in a game and see if it actually works. I'm not sure if I would do such a thing, but I'm just saying. And that is the fact that you can get insane regen stacking on your sacreds just because of the tags that you have. Consider not just the usual reforming flesh, but you've also got Enchanted Blood, which works on undead and inanimates. And speaking of inanimates, we also have Reconstruction, which gives regen for inanimates, and since all of your mannequins, and specifically your sacred mannequins, are inanimate, you will have this apply to them as well. On top of that, you get the special ability of Asphodel, giving another 10%, and you can be getting pretty insane and ridiculous regen rates on your sacreds and on your thugs. So just something to keep in mind. Again, that would probably be, if you were trying to be viable at all, at least dormant or imprisoned, because there is absolutely no reason to be having this on any of your living sacreds and then telegraphing it to everyone that you have that. So yeah, just food for thought. So I already briefly mentioned the kind of chassis that you're probably going to be having your eyes scroll over, which are all of the ones with death scales. If you are going for specific strategies, you can be picking any of these rainbows. I think they're pretty good, as we touched on briefly. Some of the other fun ones in general can be Gorgons. We've got 2 different kinds now, and the Immortal Gorgon has Dominion Immortality. If these 2 paths are something that you're looking at for your Bless, that can be a lot of fun for a cheapo option. Well, I say cheapo, but she is pretty expensive. I never got a chance to try out the Worm Soul, but he looks really, really fun. Carrion Dragon is also a really strong option. As far as other dragons goes, I would probably also think that your best dragon option is the Blue Dragon, and that's because you can dump both Sloth and Cold. Now, the reason I should mention that I like dropping both Cold and Sloth, well, Sloth is the obvious one. Your highest resource cost on your entire nation for recruitable troops is 13 for your Black Centaur. So you're never, ever, ever going to be over resources for recruitment as you will over recruitment points. So always dump Sloth. It's free design points, literally. And then Cold, I think, is also pretty synergistic with being undead in general. It's really, really nice now to also have cold resistance on your mannequins, which I think I mentioned in a previous video that they used to not have innate cold resistance in Dominions 5, and that was a bit silly. The only downside I would say is that the rest of your troops don't have snow move, so that might be a consideration for taking Winter's Gift in your Bless if you really, really, really wanted it, but you don't need to. Other than that, I think that there isn't really any downside to having Cold 2 or Cold 3. If you feel like you're likely to get rushed, then you can aim for a Dormant Titan. There's a lot of good options. Both of the Mandragora Titans are really, really fun. You've also got Great Mother, which is very strong. Great Archon, which has a lot of good path diversity for your nation. Titan of the Underworld exists, but again, death scales, unfortunately. Titan of War and Wisdom is also a really strong option for you. Titan of the Crossroads is really cool just because it's a trinity, but I think it's a little too expensive to be a Dormant Defender Titan. You could make it work, but you would have a lot worse scales. So you could be going for an Imprisoned Trinity in either the Titan of the Crossroads for stronger chassis or the gray ones. Titan of the Crossroads can also be a lot of fun because you've got a Stygian Guides option, and that can later in the game allow you to have much stronger army teleporting abilities, because some of your mannequins do kind of have a little bit lowish magic resistance, especially the animal kinds. I know I did say earlier in the game, or earlier in this video, that the mannequins generally have higher magic resistance than undead, which they do, but still, which ironic that undead have to worry about traveling through the underworld, but oh well. Fountain of Blood is especially good, since I was going over the fact that you can get really good blood blesses here imprisoned. So if you were to take this imprisoned, you'd have a lot of design points. And the other options are really good. Monolith is a classic, but a little bit more expensive now in Dominion 6. Idol of Sorcery, very, very strong, and these paths are super awesome with having Glamour Astral, allowing you to do project self shenanigans and things like that at far range. And then Bronze Colossus is there if, again, you're worried about getting rushed or things like that. So as far as spells go, I think it's a no-brainer to go down enchantment. You've got a lot of good nature spells, especially once you get to level 6 for Foul Vapors. If you take a Bless to protect yourself, you're not going to have to worry super heavily about hitting your own troops with that. even if you don't, you can just stick Panic Apostate in with a bunch of mannequins and they will be able to tank it like it's nobody's business. Death spells are also really good in enchantment. Horde of Skeletons is a classic. Later on, you've got Rigor Mortis and things like that. It's funny that we had a really big, long conversation on Discord about life after death, and I suppose it's good that it took me so long to make this video, because afterward there was a patch, and now life after death is pretty heavily nerfed, so I'm not going to go into it too deeply, but it exists still. And then obviously there's Twiceborn on the topic of life after death and such. The other two paths that you're going to be able to see a lot in enchantment for your nation are water, especially once you break into construction and are able to make water bracelets. You can do things like friendly currents. You can actually do things like hidden in snow once you get a little bit of extra water going on. And vile water for cubes and things like that. Earth gives you weapons of sharpness. Earth Shatter hammers are also really synergistic on a lot of your troops as well. The other school that's also a no-brainer and pretty heavily competes with enchantment is Alteration. Since you're probably not aiming to have an Awake, or at least I'm not aiming to have an Awake Pretender, it's going to be a little harder to get Nature 5 innately on your nation. So Mother Oak is still there, but you might not be beelining for it as quickly as you could if you did take an Awake Nature 5 Pretender. But it's still an option for later in the game, and you're still going to be heavy in competition for it. Like I mentioned, Venomous Death is super fun. Transformation is also good for cutting down on your expenses if you really need to, but I think there's so many other uses for your nature gems that personally I haven't seen it, or I should say I haven't used it a lot myself in any of the games that I've had. The other great typical options are bark skins, moss bodies, and large, all very good for your troops and nation, depending on what you're facing. Once you're getting into the realm of thugging, you've got Soul Vortex, you've got Invulnerability, which you can do with any Death 2 with a gem. And then Darkness also is a really good synergistic spell for your undead. You've got your Liquid Bodies, you've got your Frozen Hearts, you've got your Iron Skins, Temper Flesh, all the good stuff. You are technically able to get some fun Maws of the Earth casts. Another thing that I've actually done in Dominions 5 before is a surprise shatter on something like an immobile or something that teleport drops onto you, because any Earth 1 can boost up to Earth 2 with a gem and then boost up to Shatter with another gem if you really, really need to. It's kind of shortish range, but if you do a couple of attacks, you'll be able to get in range and then be able to break something down. Now we get into a bunch of good glamour spells in Alteration. Some of these are kind of hard for you to pull off just because you have such low glamour on your nation, but Twilight helps with that immensely, especially if you take a Pretender aimed at having that spell available to you. And then that pairs pretty well with Nightfall if this is the only early way of being able to get Darkness. The other things are, like I was mentioning, you're able to get Blur very easily, Group Blur for a gem, Displace Body as well for some of your thugs, and I say thugs, but your Panic Apostates and Carrion Lords are not going to be able to do that, but your Carrion Ladies would be able to, and they're actually very, very decent thugs in their own right as well. And then later on you can do Gift of Displacement if you pair a Carrion Lady up with a Carrion Lord, for example. Later game, Conjuration can be a very important one for you, but less important than for some other nations, just because of the way that your Glamour summons are able to break you into different paths. The big one is going to be Fairy Court, which allows you to break into a bit more diversity for higher paths, such as Earth, and then the obvious one is Air, and that's for either the Unseelie versions in winter, or as I like to call them, the Seelie versions and the warm temperature provinces. But both of them have a random option for air, and that's a really great thing to break into. You can get gnomes, but they're not as crucial for Asphodel as for some other Glamour nations, just because both Glamour, Earth, and Nature are all things that you already have. So this will really just be helping you boost up to get Fairy Court and things like that later on. Or you could just be getting it with your Pretender or a couple of boosters. And blue caps are the same, but they can be a little bit of fun for sprinkling in some higher Earth, because again, most of the time you're going to only be having Earth 1 on your randoms for your Panic Apostates or your Dryad Hags. Water Kobolds are very important notable mention, just in case you come across anything that you want to surprise with sailing. And briefly, we'll go over a bit some of the items that you can get. Obviously, the boosters, Nature, are very important for you. And then later on, Tree Lord Staff. Tree Lord Staff allows your Dryad Hags to really get on the same level as Panic Apostates in terms of Nature, just because they don't have their own Nature randoms. So they're going to be stuck at Nature 2 without it. Your general good thug armor option is Kithrionic Lion Pelt, and it's not as good as it used to be in Dominions 5, but it is still pretty good and there as a cheapo option. I'll do an honorable mention of Carrion Seed, but honestly I haven't really used it a whole lot, just because it doesn't seem like disease actually kills you quite that quickly, and so I would probably generally pass on this. The Carrion Bow and the Vine Bow are both cheap options for you, and the Carrion Bow can be a lot of fun if you make a couple of them and stick them on your Satyr Commanders, which you're going to be getting a lot of free spawn. I don't really do it just because I'm almost always starved on both Nature and Death, but they're there. There are a lot of good Glamour items. I'm going to go over the boosters obviously real quick, and you have to have Glamour 3 at a minimum, as well as for the Mirage Crystal, in order to get both of the pre-artifact boosters. So that's very, very important. And then the natural synergy for having Earth 2 as well is there. So those are reasons to have that. And miscellaneous, a couple of other very, very good items are the Dreamstone and the Dream Spool. Dream Spool is great for having free temp glamour gems, and it also gives you warrior illusions in battle. Dreamstone is superb research booster for all of your dryads and dryad hags, so I would definitely make a couple of these early on in the game to jumpstart your research. Briefly, another item that I've actually had a lot of fun with is this Crown of the Whispering Dead, because of the Nightmare Aura, which is applying false damage automatically to everybody around you, except enemy units only, so you don't have to worry about friendly fire either. Very fun on Carrion Lord thugs, but again costs some pretty essential death gems, which you might be using instead to Twiceborn said thugs. And the top tier Glamour Crosspath armor that you can make is Rainbow Armor, which you actually can make pretty easily with your Dryad Hags at the Water Glamour Crosspath. Extra hit points, extra magic resistance, extra reinvigoration, decent protection, all very, very great on your nation. You're going to have a lot of low earth, but if you're able to get up to earth 2 or 3, Dwarven Hammer is the natural go-to if you're planning on doing a lot of forging. Earth boots are very, very essential for your nation. If you're taking earth and blood on your pretender, then the Bloodstone is fantastic for you. And great swords of sharpness. Gate Cleaver if you are needing to siege things down as well and are able to get up to earth 3. And this actually new boot, which I haven't had a chance to test yet, but it looks pretty fun, gives you automatic earth grip around you. It's sort of the new boot version of Vine Shield, and since it's in the boot slot, you can actually pair the two of them pretty easily. So there we go. That's my Pretender design overview of Asphodel. A couple of thoughts there, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Next video, we'll be getting straight into turn 1, and I'll briefly go, as briefly as possible, go over the other nations that are in the game with me, and talk a little bit about the map as well, and then from then on we'll be going straight into expansion and the rest of the turns. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.